Welcome to Sagely Speaking with Mary Bono, the esteemed former Congresswoman known for her insightful perspectives and vast experience. Prepare to be engaged in thought-provoking conversations with influential personalities, exploring a wide range of topics, from social issues, politics, and policy, to personal development, shedding light on important issues that impact our society. Now, here's Mary.
Welcome to Sagely Speaking. I am your host, Mary Bono, and before I introduce my esteemed guest for this week, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our sponsors who make this podcast possible: Mothers Against Prescription Drug Abuse, MAP to Action, and Communities United for Smart Policy, or CUSP. All of our sponsorship information can be found on our website at sagelyspeaking.com. I'm very grateful for their generous support in helping to make this podcast possible. Now I'm going to bring in our guest, and I'm so thrilled that she's here. I have had the good fortune of working with her organization for almost a decade now. Lorraine Martin is an absolute powerhouse with an incredibly impressive background. I'll just briefly read a few interesting tidbits from her bio. She is the president and CEO of the National Safety Council, which is a nonprofit with a century-long legacy of eliminating preventable deaths and injuries from the workplace to any place. Throughout her 35 years of experience in aerospace, including leading and developing global and international businesses as an executive at Lockheed Martin, Lorraine has been singularly focused on showing up for safety and supporting employees to reach their full potential. Lorraine is honored to have served as an officer in the U.S. Air Force, where she held various leadership positions for software-intensive technology and development programs. She earned her Master's of Science in Computer Science from Boston University and her BA in Computational Mathematics from DePauw University. And among her top achievements, and I like this one because it takes me back to my congressional days, Lorraine led the largest defense program for the F-35 Lightning II stealth fighter aircraft. She also spearheaded the successful operational and cultural integration of Sikorsky, a global leader in helicopters. How is that for a bio? My goodness, you've done a million things, Lorraine. But I want to welcome you to Sagely Speaking, and thank you very much for being here.
And Mary, it's an honor to be with you today.
Well, thank you. With that background, what brought you to National Safety Council, and can you tell us what National Safety Council does?
Yeah, thank you. And as you mentioned, the National Safety Council has been around for over 100 years. And it is the nation's leading nonprofit advocate for safety, looking at what are the things that could cause you to get injured or to lose your life that we can do something about, what's preventable. So our job is to figure out what those are, follow the data, and then put some programs and processes and legislation, whatever it takes, to make sure that we can keep people safe and make sure that they live their fullest life. It really was a gravitation for me because anyone who served in the military or worked in the defense and aerospace industry knows that it's all about service. It's all about making sure that the people that you're supporting with your tools and your systems get to come home to their families at night after they've done the duty that any nation has asked them to do, and making sure that the employees who are working in those fairly high consequence manufacturing environments get to do the same. So the mission was very akin to the types of things that I'd done throughout my career, and this is just an incredible way for me to give back.
So Lorraine, clearly NSC focuses on workplace safety, but you also do a lot of work around overdoses and recovery, which is basically why we're here today. Sagely Speaking has been solely focused on the opioid crisis since January, since we began. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about too. How do the topics of overdoses and recovery in workplace safety, how does that all connect?
Yeah, and Mary, so as I said, we follow the data, and the National Safety Council looks at the data of what's causing people primarily at work, but also in our communities to be harmed when they don't need to be. And we have been following the data for decades, and we follow those most pressing safety issues. And for a long time, that has been our roadway. It's been the most dangerous thing that people do every day is get out on our streets, whether it's in a car or something else. So we were very focused on the seatbelt laws that you might have remembered, a click it or ticket, airbags. But most recently, if we lose 100 people a day on our roads, and it is still a crisis in our nation, we're losing over 200 to overdoses. And we consider that a preventable activity. That is something we can do something about, either to assist folks prior to getting to that point or to be with them when that emergency is happening. And so It's been something that the council has been involved in for about the last 10 to 15 years, and most recently focusing on how workplaces can play a role there.
I read a statistic, I believe on your website, that says nearly 10% of workplace deaths are due to overdoses.
Yeah,
That's astounding.
it is astounding. And we follow the data and it tells us where to put our energy. The leading cause of unintentional death in the United States, bar none right now, is an overdose of an unintentional death. And tragically, as you said, at workplaces, that's increased over the last sort of little over 10 years by 619% because it's increasing in our lives and our communities. And those folks have jobs and they're coming to work. And unfortunately, they're having that emergency at work. So nearly 10%, you've got that data correct. The last data that we got out of the Department of Labor was about 10%. And unfortunately, in some states, I can give you the California data, some states are literally over 20% of their workplace deaths that are happening. And we don't want a single one of those to happen at work, but they're as a result of an overdose happening while people are at work.
That's absolutely amazing. So, what does NSC believe employers should be doing to help stop the crisis?
Yeah, and they have a very important role to play since 66% of people who do have a substance use disorder, and not all overdoses are from a substance use disorder, that 66% of those folks have jobs. So they're going to work and they can be a great place to be a line of defense, not only to help folks who are struggling to get into programs, to get into resources to support them, but also to be there if that emergency does occur. We often think of workplace safety as things like fires or power outages or severe weather or perhaps other medical injuries like having a heart attack at work and being prepared for that with an AED. This is one more thing that employers not only can, but I would say must be able to address just like any other medical emergency. And that if 10% of the fatalities right now are overdoses, that's something they can lean into and be prepared. And that's where we've been focusing our efforts in the last couple years, is to provide those resources to enable workplaces to be prepared.
So clearly naloxone and access to naloxone, ready access, so it's right there for folks. You guys have been very focused on naloxone for quite some time, which I applaud you for. How is that going? Are employers receptive to this?
Yeah, it's a great question. Naloxone is the generic name for what you might have heard is called Narcan. And I will tell you, when I'm talking to businesses, very few folks even know what the word naloxone means. They might have heard of the brand name of Narcan. But what we've been doing is going around and educating workplaces, CEOs, of what's available to them right now. And because naloxone became approved by the FDA back in March for over the counter, meaning you don't need a prescription, you don't need any kind of formal authority to get it. You can get it as just going into the drugstore yourself and getting it. Workplaces now can equip their work sites, whether that's a facility or a work truck, with this over-the-counter remedy for an overdose emergency, basically, and a reversal of the overdose. It's not very expensive, and it has a 4-year shelf life. So it's something that we recommend workplaces include, like they do all their other first aid kits or their AEDs, because they do know that emergencies happen at work. And this is another one they have to be prepared for. So, Mary, it's not just having the actual drug on hand, but it's also making sure that the folks that might need to use it, your employees or your emergency response teams, they get the training to use it. It's very simple. I've been trained. I carry it in my briefcase. Anywhere I go, I have a little pin on my briefcase that says I have naloxone. You should too, and be there to help somebody if they get into this emergency. But workplaces can now do this fairly cost effectively. And to make it even easier, that's the thing, as you've mentioned, that the National Safety Council has leaned into. We have free training available on our website to and train any employee that you'd like to train. We have the ability to get access to naloxone, get it at a discount, get it shipped to your site for free. And a lot of other resources to help businesses really get over the hump here. This is still a place where we have a lot of misinformation, a lot of sort of gaps in understanding, and unfortunately still a lot of stigma.
Absolutely. And I know that you also work on recovery issues for the workforces too. So preventing an overdose death is incredibly important. But I know a lot of people come to work and they are in recovery. and we're trying to remove the stigma around being in recovery. And it's such an important topic. So can you talk about what you guys are doing for a recovery-ready workforce?
Yeah, and I love that term. That is the one we use. It's a recovery-ready and recovery-friendly workforce and workplace. It is important to make sure that you have both a drug-free workplace, so your folks are coming to work and they're not impaired, but then also have the policies, procedures, and support infrastructure to help folks who might be struggling with an addiction-related activity or a substance use challenge. A lot of people get into this situation because they've had an injury, whether that's in their life or at work. And so in some cases, workplaces are the origin for a lot of folks of taking a drug that perhaps eventually could have a substance use disorder associated with it. So workplaces have a responsibility to be part of this. Recovery-friendly policies, both are there to help support, but also to educate on the risks of some of the issues of these substances. So it can be things like fair chance policies, healthcare coverage in your substance use programs and mental health policies, employee assistance programs, education, training, all of those things. I have some data that I'd love to share with you, Mary, because I bet your listeners would be a little surprised about this. But another incentive for companies to truly lean into being recovery ready is that our analysis shows that workers in recovery miss almost 14 days fewer each year than workers who have an untreated substance use disorder, and that workers in recovery actually miss the fewest days overall, literally 3.6 less days than your common employee in your workforce. So they are more loyal and more attentive to being at work when they're in a recovery program. And so workers who are actively in recovery actually help employers avoid about $8,000 each in turnover, replacement, and healthcare costs. So it's in your best interest not only to help these individuals get to a great place, and a job usually is so important to a recovery path and a recovery journey, but also they can understand that they actually are creating a better employee and a more loyal employee. So it's in their best interest as well.
That is all fascinating, and I wasn't aware of any of that, and it bears repeating. And I think it's something that we at Mothers Against Prescription Drug Abuse might pick up on a little bit more. I think that's very important to know that. And I've always talked about we ought to be celebrating people in recovery. I think you just help do that. But it's a disease, and it takes work to be in recovery. It takes consistent, long-term work. Yet people can benefit so much from the support of their peers, their coworkers, management.
Another thing I'll share that sometimes surprised me as well is that when someone in your work life intervenes and helps you get into a program or says, "Buddy, I think there's something going on here. You need to get some help," it actually is more effective and has a better outcome to get someone into recovery and onto that positive path than a family member or a friend. For whatever reason, the workplace intervention has been shown to be even more effective. And so that just adds another reason why workplaces and employers need to be part of this equation.
How do you prevent that from feeling punitive to an employee or
Yeah.
becoming an HR problem? Excuse me. Yeah, how do you prevent that?
Yeah, that's the right question. And it's so important to lean into that. You do have to have policies, like I said, the fair chance policies and the ability to have someone get into a recovery program. And if they do the right things, be able to come back to their job once they're in a good place. It takes a lot of work, and especially if you're in a union-based work environment, to partner with your labor union on those programs to make sure that, one, you don't want someone at work who's impaired. I mean, and many of these substances can be impairing, especially opioids and the related drugs. And you don't want to drive in a car or forklift or doing something that could hurt themselves or others. So you need to make sure that you have solid policies that say when you're at work, you're whole, you're ready to do the work, and you're not in a situation where you're going to hurt yourself. And if you are, I'm going to take you out of that situation. And if you're using these substances at work, most companies also have policies that say that, that's over the line. But we do know that people who have these challenges have jobs, and it's really important to make sure you've got both of those bookends of we're going to have an impairment-free workplace And that is, especially if we're doing safety sensitive things, that's imperative. You can't work here if you're going to come and put yourself and others at harm. But if you are able to say that I have an issue and I need some help, and we can get you that help and should get you that help, then we have to have the programs on the other side that enable you to come back to be recovery friendly and then have your job to be able to go through your journey. It's a delicate balance, but the companies who get that right on both sides are going to have the best workforce and the safest workforce.
So I'm trying to understand the difference if somebody has an SUD or opioid use disorder, or if they're using opioids for pain management. How does an employer distinguish what is the difference between the two?
That's for HR, and I'm not an HR professional. But truthfully, being impaired at work is an issue no matter what. So if you are using even a prescription drug and you need it while you're at work, you have to disclose that you may be impaired, so that your employee can make sure that you're not doing things like driving a truck or a forklift while you're taking something that's been prescribed to you. So that's a really important conversation to have with your employer. If this is something that's not prescribed and it's something that is coming to you through other means, the issue is the same. You can't be impaired at work, and
Right.
you just can't. And a workplace has every right to say that you can't be drunk, you can't be impaired, whatever those issues are. I will say that, Mary, a lot of what is causing folks to lose their lives right now is neither prescription or even just folks necessarily that have a substance use disorder. It's literally what we would call a poisoning. Someone taking something that they don't know what's in it, right? And the fentanyl dynamic has really exacerbated the risk that people have of actually having an overdose, because you could have a buddy, and I literally have firsthand descriptions, and that's one of the both the honors that I have and the difficulties of this job is I get to hear those firsthand stories of folks who are challenged with safety related things. And one of them is at work, potentially a buddy saying, oh, God, I hurt my knee. I'm not sure I'm going to get through my shift. And another person saying, oh, I got this prescription, here, take this. It'll really help you get through your shift. And it's not a prescription. It's something they got on the internet. It's laced with fentanyl. And firsthand story, the person was blue in their bed that night. And all they were trying to do was get through their work shift. And they took something that they didn't actually know what was in it. And based on how much some of these drugs are in people's pockets these days, put their life at risk, right? In this case, the emergency team got there in time, but that's not always the case.
Right. Fentanyl, the introduction of fentanyl has changed what was a crisis in America with a opioid epidemic and made it a very acute crisis.
Yes.
It definitely changed the game, and we're seeing it everywhere, the workplace, the home, the school. There's so many sad, terrible stories, and this is preventable with the right policies and with the right focus on it. I'm going to take a quick break here and then continue with Lorraine in a moment. But first, I'd like to thank Communities United for Smart Policy for the support of Sagely Speaking. America's fentanyl crisis, as we just said, is putting unbearable strain on families and communities across the country. We need comprehensive action that stops the illegal flow of fentanyl across our border and provides our communities with tools like readily accessible naloxone to help save lives. Please join Communities United for Smart Policy and continue the conversation on X and Facebook at Cusp Action to help bring an end to this preventable tragedy. And I love that our conversation just flowed perfectly into that sponsor mention there, shout out. But Lorraine, something you and I talked about the other day was also family members, a loved one. You have a loved one who's going through a crisis, a substance use crisis, yet you do show up for work because you're not on any drug that's impairing your ability to work, yet you're mentally wounded. You are stressing, you're going through a lot of stress and distress. What does NSC talk about? Do you have anything to support those families who are struggling?
Yeah, two things. I'll come from the workplace perspective first and the employer responsibility. So there's a lot of things that have been facing Americans over the last 4 years. The pandemic really put, everybody off their heels. Something changed for each individual in some profound way. And that means that, when they were coming to work, whether it was dealing with a family member, as you just said, that might be having a substance use issue, or just general life issues, making sure you had childcare, making sure that you were getting, your parents taken care of in another state during the pandemic. Everybody was a little off their game. And as a result, a lot of issues came through the door as we came back to work, whether it was fatigue, mental health, way significant increase in alcohol, cannabis, mental health related issues for everybody. And we built some supervisor training, or so just general training, that helped an employee look at their colleague and say, I'm not sure they're on their game today. And I don't know why. It could be they didn't sleep last night. It could be they're going through a divorce. It could be they have a family member who's struggling with a substance use disorder. I don't really care what it is, but I'm not going to let them get into a safety sensitive situation. I'm going to intervene. And that intervening is a little challenging, right? For us to ever tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey, Sally, I'm not so sure you should get up on that ladder today. Let's step aside. So we built some training to help with that, because these issues, these stresses, these distractions that are real and sometimes very, very emotionally oriented come into the work environment, and we have to be able to address them. The other thing that we put in place, and it's something called Connect to Prevent, and you can also find that on nsc.org, but it's a set of tools that parents can have to talk to their kids, their family members, about opioids and about understanding the issues that are going on right now. Because sometimes just having those discussions with your family members, if you don't already know that there's an issue, and you want to be, one, understand what's going on, or two, just make sure that everybody's prepared, is really, really important. So we put together a set of tools that if you sign up for it, and it's free, you get a lesson once a week for 10 weeks that it gives you about a 5 to 15 minute kind of lesson to talk to your family members about these issues. There's videos and other kinds of things to explore in there. And it covers the basics of opioid, of addiction, of harm reduction, how to talk to your providers about all of this, especially around things like sports injuries, dental surgeries, when, this happens to perhaps one of your family members in a very unexpected way. So it was some resources that we put together was Procera, which is a partner of ours here that enables you to bring some of those tools home, which we know is so important.
Yeah, Pacira does a great job. They have a pain alternative to opioids, and I know they've been broadening the ability to use those in the surgical setting. But that's something that we work a lot about with at MAPTA is non-opioid, non-addictive alternatives to opioids. It's conversation. I think years ago, your doctor would prescribe opioids for you because it was sort of the gold standard, and you get 30-day supply when you can actually get addicted within 3 to 5 days. The science is saying, but now you need a conversation, right? The workplace is a good reason to talk to your doctor if you're in your pain about a non-opioid alternative that's not addictive and doesn't impair you. And I would assume that's a huge part of the education that
It has been.
You all undertake. Yeah.
Yeah, it has been. At one point, very early in this, maybe about 5-6 years ago, we have labels you can put on your card for your healthcare provider. When you hand it to them, it says, if you're going to prescribe me an opioid, tell me about it. Because sometimes parents and workers would get an opioid and not even know that's what they're being prescribed. I have seen that the prescription approaches for most physicians now does give you like 2 or 3 pills, not 30, which is great. And in some cases, I don't know if this is US wide, they also issue the naloxone with the opioid, which is a really strong statement that says, I'm giving you a drug that you may need to have an opioid overdose reversal medication on hand just in case. So that just really should wake us all up to the seriousness of this medicine and when and how it should be used.
I know that you all have had in the past great a presence on the mall, say in Washington, D.C., of people who have died from an overdose death. And I want to applaud you for that, for raising the awareness and bringing it home to people. This, unfortunately, is an issue that everybody thinks is going to happen to somebody else's family. It's not going to happen to me. And it can happen to anyone. It can certainly happen to any family. But when people think of the workplace, when I talk to you, and I always say, National Safety Council is the best thing that not enough people know about. So I hope to help raise the awareness of NSC and what all the great work you guys do. But when I think of NSC, I think of, hard hats, safety vests, yes, ladders and cherry pickers and things like that, generally speaking. But an injury can happen anywhere for sure. But are employers receptive to all of this? As you've said, a lot of reasons why they ought to be, and I'm assuming they're coming along. But how is that going? How are they
Yeah.
receiving this and implementing these great ideas?
Frankly, Mary, it's a journey, just like most things are in our culture in general, and workplaces are just a reflection of that. I've talked to a lot of CEOs and C-suites. We have 14,000 companies that are members of the National Safety Council. So I have, a really nice channel to reach out to some of the Fortune 100 and it's small and mid-sized companies as well. And I would tell you that they don't understand um, what's going on in the nation as clearly as they might, and they don't have a great understanding of one, what role they can play, and two, how much this is impacting their workforce. Many companies I talk to now have had an incident, unfortunately, where someone has either had an overdose and had to be resuscitated and successfully was, or perhaps didn't and died on the job. Those companies, I think, and those leaders, they have a little bit more of a wake up. Maybe this is something that is in my door, in my house. When I first talk to folks who have not had an event, they think this is something else outside their doors, folks that are down and out on their luck or just not my employees, right? That's not who we employ. Unfortunately, with 200 folks passing away a day, that's like 2 regional jets crashing every day. That's how many folks are dying of an overdose every day. It's touching most everybody's lives, whether it's a family member, a worker colleague, someone in your school, in your town. It is starting to touch everyone. And that's horrible and horrific and something we've got to turn around. But it does, I think, assist with leaders understanding that there is no demographic that's spared here. There's no age group that's spared. And I've looked at the data. There's no, gender that's spared. It is everyone that's being affected. And a lot of those folks have jobs. And so I think over time, people are starting to understand and to see it. Just recently, the White House issued a call to businesses to take a pledge to have training in naloxone in their workplaces, which is great. And they're sharing our resources as part of that. In addition, the Department of Defense has required naloxone and training to be in the bases recently. So some of those actions will really help, I think, bring home that this is everyone's job and we all have to lean in here. And it is your employees. These are great people that are struggling, and these are folks that we need to help.
Lorraine, before I lose you, I just wanted to share something we work on. It's called The Greatest Gift is a Conversation. And that is to talk to your loved ones and your peers about what is going on. Again, it can happen to anybody. There is no safe pill that's out there unless you're 100% certain it came from a pharmacy. So I think, like NSC, we are trying to bring this conversation out of the shadows and make sure people know it's a good, healthy thing to have. I think it has to be throughout the population. And this was born out of a mother who was sending her daughter off to college, and my listeners know the story very well. But I said to her, "Have you had the talk?" And she said, "I don't need to. My kid is a good kid." And that's the problem. There's a lot of problems in that statement, but the problem is it can happen to anybody. It can happen in a bar. A drink can now be laced with fentanyl. That somebody's trying to roofie somebody. It could be fentanyl laced. There are just so many ways that it's happening. I just want to applaud your great work. We work together in the Collaborative for Effective Prescription Opioid Policies, or CPOP. We've done that for quite some time, and NSC has just been such a great contributor and hard worker on all of the things that we do there. Recently, we had a roundtable discussion on having naloxone readily accessible in schools and what policy changes need to happen around the country to make that happen. So I want to thank you for your partnerships in so many different places. You've already mentioned your website, but can you help our listeners understand where they might go to learn more about NSC and maybe join all of your great work?
Yes, nsc.org is our top website. We also just released our Worker Wellbeing Hub. And so if you go to the Worker Wellbeing Hub, you'll get all the resources having to do with naloxone training, overdose reversal medication training. You can order your naloxone right from our website, and also a bunch of resources on creating both a drug-free workplace policy and a recovery-friendly policy. All those resources are available to you for free. And we'd love to make sure that more companies are using them. And I really appreciate, Mary, you giving us this voice to your listening audience to hopefully have those conversations and have those conversations spread.
Well, I love the work you're doing, Lorraine, and all of your folks at NSC. I just want to thank you so much for being here today. I hope our listeners do check out those great assets, those great web links and websites to find out what they can do to get this information. So to our listeners, I want to thank you for joining us this week. I'd like to again thank our sponsors who make the show possible: Communities United for Smart Policy, MAP to Action, and Mothers Against Prescription Drug Abuse. We'd love to have your feedback, other than Mary, you stutter a lot, but any other feedback other than that. We'd love your feedback. So if you have any thoughts, concerns, or questions, I can be reached at hello@sagelyspeaking.com. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us today on Sagely Speaking with Mary Bono. Remember, wisdom is a journey, not a destination. For more insights, visit our website at sagelyspeaking.com.